All right. Welcome, everyone. A big shout out to our Pit, Ross, Cheryl, everybody organizing this event. And as well, thanks for all the speakers. Like we've been having great sessions today, and we'll have tons more tomorrow. So that's great. For the ones who don't know me, my name is Oliver Rodriguez. I am a Microsoft Business Application MVP. I'm very active on Power Apps, portals, stuff. So I have a blog where I have the link here, so oliverrodriguez365.com. Most of my articles are around portals or Dynamics 365. If you're not connected to me on LinkedIn yet, please feel free to connect. And I'm also leaving my Twitter handle here. Today, I'm gonna talk about extending Power Apps portals using client-side script. So I'll be mainly focusing on jQuery. And yeah, hope you like the session. All right, so the agenda for today is I'll do a very quick recap on out-of-the-box components, and then we'll jump to client-side scripting, mainly jQuery. So we'll talk about what is jQuery and what are selectors and filters, all these kind of things. The demo, I'll probably be doing a mix with the presentation, so I'll say a little bit of theory and then jump to the demo, and then we should have some time in the end for Q&A. So first, a very high level and very quick recap on existing Power Apps portals components. Now, of course, we have more, but these are just kind of like the main components that we have. So we have a web page, which every component you're seeing here, they are represented by a record in your Dataverse. And a web page would simply represent a page in your portal, in your website. Content snippets would represent a snippet which can be a text, can be a JavaScript code, can be a HTML code, can be a mix, can be a bit of liquid. So it can be a mix of lots of things. And then you can embed that content snippet throughout your portal. You can use that in JavaScript or in web pages, in web templates, and so on. We have web files, which we can use to upload a file. So usually they are very much used for images, so logos or icons that you might have around your portal, or you can also upload, for example, a PDF document, which could represent an application guide, and then you can make that available for download in your portals itself. Also Bootstrap files, we usually upload there. And I'm gonna show here a way of uploading JavaScript files in your web files there. We're gonna go through that. Basic forms and advanced forms. This was previously the entity forms and web forms. They have just been renamed. So basically, it is a way of us to interact with data from the Dataverse. Basically, they will be pointing to a Dataverse table and the form. You can even specify the tab if you want of that form, and then you can show data and interact with data as well. List, so previously called entity list, it is basically how to view data in a view format. So they're very useful in general in portals. Table permissions and web roles, they're the very basic, or maybe the very core of the security model of the portals. There are a few more entities involved, but these two are probably the core ones, the main ones. And basically, they're very similar to what we are very familiar in Dynamics 365 using security roles. So here with table permissions and web roles, we can define the level of access that a user may have into a particular table. Just a quick thing to remember, users in Power Apps portals, they are not the same user records in Dataverse, so they are normally represented by contacts here in Power Apps portals. So whenever we are setting up a table permission, we would normally want users to only see records related to that contact itself. So we can also set it to global, but I think the most common, for example, if you're setting up a table permission for the case entity, you would only want users to see their own case records. So I'll just jump here to my environment. And I'll just do a very quick recap again, and we'll create a few pages here. So I'm here in makepowerapps.com. and I'm going to click on Portal Management app. I'm going to click on my portal itself. And I'm also going to launch the Portal Studio, which is just by clicking the Portal app and click on Edit. So basically, a few ways we can make changes to our portal would be using the Portal Studio and using the Portal Management app. The Portal Studio is probably more user-friendly, and it's very easy for us to make changes to content, create pages, and so on. But just for the purpose of this demo, I'll be mainly using the Portal Management app, which is a model-driven app with the portal tables. There's no specific reason. I'm just more familiar, so I just prefer to use this interface here. And here I have my portal. So at this moment, it's a very vanilla, very blank portal. I'm already signed in here as an admin user, and I'm going to create a few records here. I'm going to start by creating 2 web pages, and these web pages, one of them I'm going to show a list of account records, and then I'm going to create a second web page that will allow us to edit that account record. So I'm just going to call, whenever I'm creating records in the portals, I always like to put some initials. So I'm just going to put my initials here, but this could be like my project initials or my company initials. So I always like to define this way. So I'm going to call this account page. Home page, partial URL, just put accounts. I'm selecting here a few basic properties. Okay, now that it's saved, I'm just going to create a second web page, which is going to be the account edit page. I'm going to select my website. This time, my parent web page can be the page containing my list. So now what I need to do is creating my list and form itself. So I'm just going to jump to, first I'm going to create the form. So this is going to be an edit form. So I'm going to call for account. I'm going to point it to the account table. Going to select the form information, and I'm going to select the general tab. I don't necessarily have to. If I keep this blank, it will render the entire form. But just for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to select there. And I'm going to select the mode as edit and retrieve the ID via query string, which is coming from the table. Now there are a bunch of properties here in the basic form, but I just don't want to get into too much details because we need to jump to the client-side scripting. But basically, we can add change a few validation settings, change, for example, redirect once they completed and submitted the form. There's plenty of properties we can do here, and this additional settings here we're probably gonna go back here for this custom JavaScript field, but we'll do that in a second. Now I also need to create my list. So in my list here, I'm going to call and select the account. And I'm going to select a view. So I'm selecting an out-of-the-box view, all accounts. But normally when I'm creating, so in a project, whenever I'm creating the portal objects, I always like to have a Dataverse object that is specific to my portals. So I would probably have the initials of the portals, or maybe web as a prefix. And that way I know that view is only being used in the portals. This is just to help the maintenance of your solution in general. But there's nothing wrong if you do want to use the out-of-the-box ones, or one that is, if you want to share between the model-driven app and the portal app, it's not a problem. All right, here in options in my list, I also have the custom JavaScript field, which we're going to use later. And we have also the grid configuration. So from here, the grid configuration, I can specify an edit action, and I'm going to create this action to my account edit web page. All right, at this moment, we created the list, the form, we associated these two, but I didn't associate them with the web page. So just jump back here to my web page. First, I'm going to this one. And whenever we create a web page, you're probably familiar with this. By default, the portals create a second web page. So you can see here that we have this web page that is in the information form. We call this the root web page. And then we have a localized content web page. So whenever we are making changes, so if you want to change the title or the content of the web page, or if you want to put JavaScript, whatever in terms of content you want to do, you have to use the content web page. Otherwise, it will simply be ignored. Web page, I'm going to select my list here. And now I'm going to jump to the other web page, to the content web page, and I'm going to select my basic form. So now back here to my portal, I'm going to clear cache. And if I did all correctly, I should be able to go to the accounts web page. Okay, so here now we have a list with the account records. It's a very simple list, but I think like the main idea here is in literally 5 minutes or maybe less, I was able to create 2 pages interacting with Dataverse and display, making available the data from my Dataverse to external users. So in literally just a few minutes, you can already have a working prototype for your customers, and that's very, very great about Power Apps portals. All right, so that was a very basic recap of Power Apps portals. But now one thing that is very important here, and I see this question often in the forums. So what if we want to hide and show a field? So basically, it doesn't. Power Apps portals ignores whatever you have in the Dataverse level. So for example, if you create a business rule to hide and show fields or to set a field mandatory, all these kind of things, Power Apps portals will simply ignore that. Maybe that will become available in the future, we don't know, but at this moment, Power Apps portals simply ignores. And also if you have a JavaScript in your Dataverse form, this will also be ignored by Power Apps portals. So whenever we need to do this kind of things, we need to come back here to client-side scripting and do that in Power Apps portals. All right, so first of all, what is client-side script? And this is a very obvious statement, but it's as simple as that. It executes within the browser. So whenever we're talking about server-side code, if like a page, whenever a page is being loaded, your browser is pulling code from the server side and it's loading the page. But whenever we want to hide and show fields, this kind of things, we don't want to reload the page just for a simple hide and show of fields. So we want to execute that within the browser. This type of coding is very much used for validate and manipulating user data. And it's also very much used to display alerts or even manipulate the controls of your page. So if you want to change colors or if you want to change the behavior of a certain field, you can use client-side script for that. Okay, so where can we place the JavaScript code in Power Apps portals? It is actually tons of places, and I'm going to show a few examples here. So we can place in the web pages, in content snippets, in basic forms, advanced forms, lists, web templates, and web files. So just try to do a very, very quick example here. So if I jump back here to my environment, so in here I already have my list open. So I'm just gonna jump back to the model-driven app. I'm going to open my list, click on options, and very, very simple code here. I'm just going to 1, 2, 3. I'll save this. So you see that this is in the list level. So if I come back here, clear config, and refresh my page, there you go. We have a very simple JavaScript code there. Another thing I wanted to show is creating your own JavaScript library. So either using web templates or web files. So what do I mean by a JavaScript library? So if we want to call the same method multiple times. So if you're very familiar with coding, either is a server-side web application, or a server-side client application, or a web application, doesn't really matter. If it's a web service, doesn't really matter. You're very familiar with helper classes and creating one single class with a bunch of common functions, and then you can just call these functions throughout your other classes or other pages, whatever you're developing. So this is just a strategy. It's very, very common for any type of development, really. So how do we do this in Power Apps portals? So one way that I often do would be using a web template. So I have one here pre-created, but it's quite empty at the moment. Whenever we are placing JavaScript code in a web template, we have to remember that a web template normally renders a HTML. So if you're putting JavaScript code, you have to put within the script tag. And I'll just copy and paste here a very simple example of a library. Now this library, all it's doing is it has only one function for a custom alert. And I'm using here the module pattern from JavaScript. It's just kind of like a common way for developers to create JavaScript libraries, or even large files, but you don't need to use the same syntax that I'm using here. But basically, all I'm doing here is having one common function for a custom alert. Okay, so now that we have this script here, this library, we need to make sure this library is being loaded on my portal pages, right? At the moment, this is just a custom web template, and we don't have access to it. So how do we make sure this web template is being rendered, is being executed in every page? There are a few ways to do this. One way that I like is using a content snippet called tracking code. So if you don't have this content snippet in your environment, don't worry, you can just create. It's just a content snippet with this name, and this is being loaded in every page of the portals. Just clear. And now what I need to do here is to include a web template. Here's using the Liquid. I don't want to jump into much details of Liquid template here, as we were just going through the previous session around Liquid, and I think there's another one tomorrow. But basically what the include Liquid tag is doing is include the content of this web template into this snippet. And this snippet, I know for a fact that it's being loaded in every page of my portals. And I know also for a fact that this web template here contains a JavaScript library. So in other words, I'm basically loading my custom library to every page of my portals. So now if I simply clear config here, and I'll just refresh this. And now just for simplicity, instead of going back to my portal management app, I'm just going to use my developer tools from my browser. And by the way, if you are starting with client-side scripting or making changes to the behavior of the forms and pages, the developer tools of your browser is going to become your best friend. So you're going to have to be very familiar with this guy, because it will be necessary for us to understand what are the classes or how the elements are structured in your page to be able to manipulate those elements. So developer tools will be your best friend. So here in the console tab, I can actually search for that function now. So for example, if I click here, my portal.js lib, and I do my custom alert, it's going to call my custom alert because it's being loaded in every page. So even if I jump to a different page here, so about us, it's just an out-of-the-box page. If I do the same thing, it will call my custom alert. Now, if I go back to my content snippet, and this, save, clear cache again, page. Okay, I'm gonna call the same function here, not exist, because I basically removed here from the content snippet, so that doesn't exist anymore. So this is a simple way, but it's a nice way of showing how to create your own library through web templates. And then some people might think, okay, what if I already have a library that I want to use in a .js file? You can also create your own, upload your own JavaScript file in the web files, and I'm going to show you how. It's not my preferred way, but it is possible as well. So I'm going to create a new web file. I'm going to call my file. And I'm going to call this my portal.js lib.js, select published. And in my notes, I now have to attach my JS library. Once I try to do this and click add note, I'm going to get an error. And the reason for this is because of the type of my file, right? There is a way for us to bypass or to fix this, which would be going to the advanced settings, clicking on administration and system settings, and then these are by default a set of blocked extensions for attachments, and JS should be here. However, so you can, technically speaking, you can change this, but if you change this, it means that other users from either the portal or Dataverse or people using the model-driven apps will be able to upload JS files. So I would highly recommend you not to change this at all. So if I just close back here, so what's the alternative then? The alternative is simply creating a different extension here. So you can just put whatever you want, my.js or ES or PS, that doesn't really matter. You can simply create your own extension, and this will basically bypass that validation, and it will allow you to upload the file, right? Whenever you're referencing the file, you won't be referencing by this name, but instead you will be referencing by the partial URL. So you can still referencing using a .js. So if I go now back to my content snippet, find again tracking code. So if I go here to my HTML, I can reference that library using the script source. This is basically going to load the file into this snippet, which again means that in every page it's going to be loaded. So if I refresh this, there you go. We have our library being loaded again. Okay, so jQuery, what is jQuery then? jQuery, in the end, it is JavaScript. It is a JavaScript library, and it's free. It's open source. So if jQuery is JavaScript, why do we need jQuery? It basically simplifies tons of JavaScript code. Either is AX calls or content manipulation or animations, changing CSS, doesn't matter. It basically has tons of functions and methods that with a few lines, 1 or 2 lines of jQuery, if you were to write the same thing using JavaScript, you would probably write like 10 lines, So I have an example here that I'm gonna show in a moment. So that's one of the reasons I like jQuery. And another reason I like jQuery is because it's already available in Power Apps portals. It's basically, you don't need to reference the jQuery library. It's already preloaded in Power Apps portals in the bundle of the website. So you don't need to worry about that. And always, whenever we're talking about client-side script, now I know there are more modern frameworks now, like React, Angular, and this kind of things. But and we're going to talk about them in the end. But those are very nice if you're creating a new page, all using that technology. But if you need to interact with components in your screen, and normally that's what you want to do with Power Apps portals. What you want to do is literally check your accounts list and make a few changes here. Imagine you want to disable the sort, or imagine you want to change, remove this link here for the email. This is kind of what you want to do normally in a normal project. So it makes a lot of sense to use jQuery. And this here is a very, very simple example that I have. So basically what I'm doing here is adding a text after the name field of my account form that I'm going to show in a moment. And if we were to use JavaScript, it's literally 5 lines of code, and literally the same thing using jQuery, it would be 1 line of code. If I just copy this, jump here to my form, I'm going to open the developer tools just to save time. Instead of going back to the model-driven app and setting the JavaScript there. So if I this is the JavaScript version. We have it there, and if I copy and paste the jQuery version, there you go. So they're doing the same thing. It's just one has 1 line, the other one has 5 lines. And one thing that is important to mention is that when talking about client-side scripting, JavaScript, this kind of things, there are tons of ways to achieve the same result. So if you're doing something and then you see something that is something somewhere else that is completely different, but you're achieving the same result, it doesn't necessarily mean that what you're doing is wrong. Of course, there's always a right and a wrong way to do it, but it doesn't mean that what you're doing is wrong. It might just mean that it is a different way to achieve the same result. So selectors. So selectors are basically a way to get an element from your page itself, and these are very common selectors in jQuery. So if you want all elements from a specific tag, so for example, if you want all span elements, or if you want all the paragraph P, or if you want all the divs, or if you want all controls, all this kind of things. So you can just use the $, and within brackets and quotes, you can just specify the tag itself. If you know the ID of the element, you can use the hash and then specify the ID of the element. And this is very, very used in Power Apps portals. Probably these two are the ones I use the most, the ID and the class. So sometimes we don't have the ID on the element, but we have the class. So just using a dot, you can get the class. If you know the class, but you know that the same class is using by a few elements with a specific tag that you don't want to retrieve, you can specify the tag element and the class element. There's an option for you to get all of the elements in the page. I personally don't use that. It's very common for web development, but I personally don't use that a lot for Power Apps portals. So if I just jump back here to my environment, and remember I said that the developer tools will become your best friend. So if I inspect element here, it is very important that we understand what are the classes that by default Power Apps portals load the elements and this kind of things. And if we see, for example, here this input element, we have the ID of name. If I check this one here now, main phone, the ID is telephone 1. So basically, this is an out-of-the-box behavior from Power Apps portals. It loads, it renders the page with each field being the same schema name as your Dataverse columns and fields. So, for example, this option set here is a custom field, and I have here a codec, which is the initials of the company I work for. And then we have a codec option set, and the same here for the next field, codec other text field. It's a very, very simple example, but basically the idea is you can easily retrieve your elements if you know the schema name, and normally any developer would be very familiar with the schema name of the and columns. So here in my example, I'm using the identifier using the hash, and then I'm going to get the name and setting the CSS border of this name here, this control. With one line, we can set a CSS property. We can set the style of the border for this one here. And then this other example here that I have. So what I'm doing here is I'm retrieving 2 classes. So I'm looking for all the elements with the class text and the class form control. And I'm also setting a border. Let's just change this to blue. So you see that it's changing a bunch of fields here to blue, but not all of them. So if I inspect this element here, for example, you see that in the classes we have 2 classes, which is form control and pick list. But what I'm specifying here is the form control and the text class. So that's why these here are being ignored. And I believe the description as well, I think it's a text area. Yes, it's text area and form control. So for those reasons, they are being ignored. Defined selector. So basically, given a jQuery object, the find will allow us to search through the child elements of that main object. So I use find quite a lot for Power Apps portals, and a very good example here that I have is with lists. So this example here, I'm retrieving the entity list via the classes. So I have 2 classes here, and I'm getting the first instance of this this class in case we have multiple lists in the same page. And then I'm using the dot find here, and I'm specifying the tags itself. So I'm specifying the table, table body, and table row. And for each of that list, this array here that's going to return pop. I'm using the find again here because what I'm trying to do here is pop on the console the account name. So again, using the row that I have here in this parameter, I'm finding a cell where the data attribute is named. And then finally, I'm retrieving the data value of that. Back here to my list. And I can execute this here directly in the browser. You see that I'm looping through the records on the list, and I'm showing the account name. A few filters, and I think I had a few filters here in the example. So these are very common. So if you have an array, basically what a filter is a way of refining a selector that you already have, and it normally starts with a column. So if you want to get the first element occurrence of an array, or last, or the nth position, or first child, or even numbers, odd items, this kind of things. So this is very useful depending on your requirement as well. Imagine you want to set to highlight the odd numbers, change the CSS or something, do a background color depending on the line of the items here. So there are a few things you can do. just for example here. So I'm getting the first, I'm retrieving, I'm selecting the elements with the control class. And then for the first item, I'm going to set as blue, a border as blue. For the fourth item, so the NF, which is the fourth, I'm passing as red. And the last one I'm going to set as yellow. Just something funny there with the CSS, but it's not a big deal. And then you can see that it's highlighting here the items of the class control. Events, and you're probably seeing in my code that I was starting my jQuery code with document ready when I was placing the code in Power Apps portals instead of the browser. And the reason for that is the document ready is an event that is loaded when the page it finishes loading. Basically, it's ready. And this should be used, in my opinion, as a best practice to make sure your JavaScript code will be executed once the page is loaded. So whenever we are starting JavaScript code for Power Apps portals, always start with document ready and place your code in here inside the function. The on event. Basically, what the dot on does is it enables you to attach an event handler function to any element. So basically, what you would do here is select first the element. So for example, you find a button and then use the dot on click and specify the function for it to do in the on click. The on change, the function to do when it changes the value or once it loads. So let me just copy this code here. So I'm going to jump back to my form. Click on additional settings. And here in custom JavaScript here, so I have a simple example here. So I'm going to hide my other text field. So let's say, for example, we only want to show this text field if my option set is set to other. Otherwise, it should be hidden. So I'm going to hide this field. What I'm also doing here is adding a function to the update button click. So it will simply display an alert button click, but you could do anything you wanted. And then to the on change of my option set, which is this field here above. I'm getting the value of my option set, and then if the value is 5, check either in Dataverse, or I can also check here, inspect this element, and take a look at how it's being rendered. So the value 5 is other. And then I'm showing my other text field, otherwise I'm hiding. So if I save this, it's saved already. So clear config, clear cache and refresh. All right, so you see that the other text field is no longer here. Now, if I click on other, it will become available. If I change again, it's no longer available. And if I click submit, it's gonna jump my alert. You see that it's not changing my behavior of my update button. It's just adding functionality on top of it. And there's also a shortcut. So if you don't want to use the dot on and specifying click, you can use, I think, dot click and dot change. I think this is just a personal preference. I prefer to use this naming convention, but there's also shortcuts there if you want to use the dot change. A few common methods, and I think all of these are probably the ones I use the most when it comes to Power Apps portals. So once you retrieve this, once you use the selector and retrieve the element you want, you can hide and show the element. You can get the HTML. Let's say you're trying to do a manipulation of that HTML. You can append or prepend, which is basically injecting an element into after or before another element. You can use the on for the events, which we just talked about, and you can also detach an event using the .off. We talked about this one earlier, so CSS to define, to get or set the style of an element, attribute, again, to get the attribute of an element, value. So those are all probably very familiar, and they're very, very much used in Power Apps portals. Okay, so one thing here that I think I should talk about is portals form validation. So basically, what the code, the example here that I have, we are not making any validations. And what if we want to add custom validations? Okay, so something conditional. So let's say I'm going to keep using my example here. So if I click on other and this field is blank, I need to pop up a message. I need to not let them submit the form. So because this is conditional, we don't want to set this field as mandatory, right? So we want this to be conditional. So we need to use this form validation. And the way we do this is using this piece of code. Now, don't worry too much about this code. This is available in Microsoft documentation. What you need to understand here is the importance of the page validators. And then what basically my code is doing here is creating a new validator. So basically, just before I jump here, if I just inspect here, and this is not exactly jQuery or JavaScript. This is more a Power Apps portals thing. So if I get this object called page validators, you can see that we have 18 validators in my form. And just if you take a quick look here at their name, you can see that it's checking validations around the length of the fields. This one here is saying that the name is required. So basically it has a few lines here, a few objects specifying the validators I already have in this page. So what I'm doing here is creating a new validator. So I'm creating a new specifying an ID, specifying which control I'm validating, the error message itself. And you can see that we have a link here that we are injecting a scroll and focus to that field later on. And then this is probably the most important part, which is the evaluation function. So this is the function responsible for your validation itself. So basically what I'm doing here is retrieving the value of my option set and retrieving the value of my text field. If this text field, if the value is 5, which means other, and other text field is blank, I'm returning false. Otherwise, I'm returning true. So this is the function that I'm specifying. And then finally, I'm just adding this new validator to my page validators. This last line here is just literally to hook the link of my message to scroll to my field. So let me again copy this code here. Just 1 second. Is here. Refresh the page. Okay, so now before I try to do anything, if I go here in my browser and check the page validators, you can see that we now have 19 page validators, basically because we added one more line, which is my validator for the text field. Now, if I try to select here in the option set other, and I keep this blank, when I click on submit, it basically, it won't even try to go to the server side. It will here in the client side level, it will throw me an error message saying, please enter a text. And if I just add any value here, submit, it's gonna upload my record. So basically, this process is probably the most important part of your code. Basically, that's where you're gonna put your logic that you're validating here. Just a quick tip: the error message, avoid hard coding. So try to put this maybe in the content snippet or something. So in case in the future users want to change, it's a straightforward enough change. The $sign. So you probably noticed that I was always starting with a $sign. So what is the $sign? It's literally just a shortcut for starting us to use jQuery functions. There are a few other ways as well. So there are like window.jQuery, window.$sign, window.jQuery, or jQuery. They all do exactly the same thing. So don't worry if you see online an example for jQuery that are using one of the other ones. I do find the $sign the most common. And again, just for personal preference, they are, I prefer to use the $sign, but they are all the same. Just this here, you see that they are all doing the same thing. I'm just appending a text here. But again, they're all doing the same. We can't go through a lot of examples here, but basically every article, not every article, but most of my articles are around some sort of manipulation on either entity lists or forms. I'm always using jQuery, JavaScript to kind of manipulate a little bit the behavior of Power Apps Portal's pages. So take a look there, and if you have a tip of a topic that I haven't written about, please let me know, and I'll see if I know how to do it, and I'll try to play around. I'll try to anticipate a question here, but I think I already spoke a little bit about it. Can we use other frameworks? There's nothing exactly saying you can't. Okay. If we think about Angular, so an Angular app is more, it's based on a single page web application. So this means that the server sends all the information they need, and then everything else is processed by the browser, which at this point, it results in a very fast website in general. The way I see it, and I think this is possibly a personal opinion here, if you're building a website in Angular, you're building the entire website in Angular. I don't think it makes a lot of sense for you to build the entire website in a specific language and then suddenly one page in a different language. Now, if you're building specific widgets or something that is very specific, then it might make sense for you to use a different framework if it is your preference. But overall, I don't see huge advantages of using other frameworks. And if you think about it, and that's something I talked earlier, normally when we are using Power Apps Portals, we want to use lists, we want to use forms, because the main advantage is literally like a few clicks, you have a functioning page, right, with data and a bunch of stuff nice happening there. So why are you rewriting everything in Angular just because it's a more modern technology? So when we're using jQuery and JavaScript, we can manipulate the existing page, the existing data, and change the behavior to whatever we want. So for those reasons, I personally don't use a lot of these components. I've used React for just a small widget, and that was nice. I think it's just one thing you have to bear in mind is that those languages are very much used for building user interfaces. So you have to keep the UI consistent. Just a tip for you to bear that in mind. And if you're looking for how to use these frameworks, I think Nick Haydock posted, I think was the last community call was around using React in Power Apps Portals. So that should be available on YouTube. So take a look at that if you're curious on using React with Power Apps portals. Also, one thing here about Angular and Vue.js, they both use that kind of the curly brackets, the mustache brackets, as a syntax as part of the language, and that kind of conflicts with Liquid template. So if you're using one of those, you probably need to use the Liquid raw tag, and the raw will basically ignore all the Liquid code and let it run your Angular or Vue.js code. Node.js, I think it's more used for developing web API, so I'm not sure it's super applicable for Power Apps portals. But again, the general message here is there's nothing saying you can't use these frameworks. You just have to understand if it makes sense or not. So I'm happy to take questions here now, and big thanks for everyone who organized this event. Again, big thanks for everyone listening. Do we have questions?
Yes, we do, Oliver. Thank you. Firstly, thank you. That was amazing. Like, so interesting, and I feel that I'm learning so much from all of the sessions, but particularly I really liked some of the things that you spoke about there, in that, you told us what not to do, and that even if we can do something, we shouldn't always do it, right? And also that there are many ways to do the same thing, which we know across the platform is pretty much always the case, right? So there have been some questions in the chat. To be honest with you, we've got some great guys who are sort of moderating that chat for us, and a lot of the questions I believe have been answered, but there are just a few questions right at the end there that haven't been fully answered yet. I'm just going to grab those out now.
Sure.
So the first one is, have you tried using TypeScript with Portal? And if so, apart from the strongly typed benefits, can you think of any other benefits to using TypeScript with Portal?
I haven't used myself. Yeah, I'm not sure I'll be able to help you much here. Don't see a lot of benefit. Now, one good thing about TypeScript is I believe it is a Microsoft-based technology, so it is probably a Microsoft preferred framework, let's say, to use in general. But I haven't used myself, so can't help you a lot there. Sorry about that.
Okay, and the next question is, need to apply jQuery after entity list completed its loading of all rows. Sorry, is there any syntax?
So yes, so what you should be doing is using the onLoaded event. So let me share my screen again. Let me jump back. I think I do have an example easy enough here. I just think we wouldn't have time, but this is a great moment. Okay, so this is my my entity list here, and I'm gonna jump back to my list and click on options. And I'm gonna paste here. So this example here is basically disabling the sort of my entity list, and what I'm doing here is using the list onload. So onloaded, it's gonna be looking at the list, and it's gonna basically take a look at the header, and then get the text of the header and replace with it without the link to to sort the column, right? So if I click here, config, and refresh, so now we can no longer sort. And even if this list is sorted by another means, the onload is always going to be triggered, and it won't show that anymore. So maybe I think maybe because I disabled the sort, it wasn't the best example. Let me see if I still have another function here. Okay, I think I have one here. So let me just get rid of this. So what I'm gonna do here now is I'm gonna go back here to that example where I was just putting in the console the account name. This. So once I refresh the page, it should didn't work. Try once more. Okay, something didn't work there. But sometimes if you don't specify that is in the list on load, it might just run once, or it might not even run from what I'm seeing here now. So what you have to do is specify to use the onload. So whatever function you're gonna do during the onload. So I think this was the example. So this guy.
Okay, fab. Thank you. Thank you very much for explaining that. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So yeah, I just would like to say thank you very much, Oliver. Lovely to chat to you again, right? So, and thank you very much for your session today.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Yep.
One last thing before you rush off. Could I ask you please just to pop your contact details into the chat so that attendees can connect with you, and if they have any further queries, maybe they can get a hold of you.
Definitely, 100%. I'll do that.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you.
Thanks again. I'm going to just
everyone.
pause the recording now. Thank you.